Alright, so I recorded 4 videos, and 2 of them I removed the lens cap so that I could showcase this from Simpsons. Lisa's holding the Bad News Press, the red dress press, and all this is sort of like the baby on board sign, and dice in the mirror. So she has a newspaper there, she has a newspaper here, and I flip it over one more time, and anyway, so I found my old hat, and maybe I'll wear that sometime soon. Okay, so now that the lens cap is on, got my old phone here, and I'm having problems with the cable. It says connect your charger. This was my first smartphone, and the keyboard does work. It doesn't, like the back button doesn't work. Some of the most important buttons don't work, so there's really nothing I can do. There's a few things I can do more than a normal phone, because it is a smartphone, a Motorola smartphone. So let me plug it in somewhere else. Alright, so here's a sound machine that I use. It takes a small confined space and makes it sort of, I don't think the wireless charging would work. It takes a small confined space and makes it sort of feel larger, even if it's just a illusion. Whoops, this had fallen off, so it's not quite broken. Well, I need 2 hands. I think I'll do that later. So here is my official laptop. It was actually only $80, and so it's the T430 Lenovo ThinkPad. It was only $80. It's never had a good battery, and that's okay. This SEIKI computer, or it's sort of a computer. It's a TV. It was $200, but that was Black Friday. So I have to set up this right here for the phone to record. So now the game's starting. Oh, I just wanted to show like how it runs. Now the stuff is now it's not running as good as it was before I started the game, because it's one of the most intense games, labor intensive, I don't know what to say, for the computer that exist. Alright, so there's no way for me to monitor that, so I just got the Introduction to Philosophy playlist.
You might have seen videos like this before, but here's the big secret. Anyone can make one of these videos in a few minutes. You might think you need a professional animator.
Gotta skip ad. I don't really know what I'm gonna do. I got my controller over here. It's gonna take a long time to finally load. It's one of the most labor-intensive games, so maybe I can go through the Simpsons Springfield episode guide. I don't know. It's gonna be quite some time. I just sort of figure it's not really worth playing video games unless I'm recording it. There's so much stuff that I miss. What's so funny is It says unauthorized public performance is forbidden. It's forbidden. Rental. There's all those things. And one of those things was reverse engineering.
This course is as a general introduction to philosophical issues. I will be talking about historical figures, but mainly what I want to do is to introduce you to the issues. So if you look through the syllabus, you'll see that each week's topic, this one's introduction, each week's topic will be some
Can I change the
general
speed?
area or issue within something called philosophy. Now, you've taken this philosophy course.
1.5.
You could have taken other things. I don't think there's anybody, let me just make sure that that's right. Is there anybody in the room who for some reason or other is specifically required to take this particular course? As far as I know, your requirements are to take something or other, and there's about 4 selections. And so what guides your selection is sometimes what's available, sometimes it's what's available at a particular time. But I hope that at least in some of your cases, you had sufficient choices that at least part of your decision was based on some degree of interest in the course. And it wouldn't be your fault if that weren't true. Sometimes it's just because the choices aren't there. But I hope that some of you had some thought this might be a neat experience as these things go. But what I need to know now from you, and I can't know in advance, is what did you think this experience would be? I mean, so the question is, what's philosophy? As far as you know. I mean, the word does appear in normal English reviews. It's not like some of the names of courses, that have such technical names that you never hear in the common language. Philosophy, that's a word that comes out. So what is it that you guess you're going to be getting from taking this course? Yeah. So philosophy is different points of view. And that's correct. I mean, as you'll see in the quarter, we'll certainly be exposed to lots of different points of view. But you get different points of view in other. What makes anything philosophical? I mean, let's say somebody's a pretty philosophical person. What does that mean? Well, let's say somebody refers to one's philosophy of life. What's that? Different points of view about life, I guess, for one thing. But let me offer you some options.
The charger's not connecting to my old phone, so I don't know what I'll do.
Philosophy, we've got such things as...
Here's the old phone.
But there's also such things as, you'll see this if you ever look in an RIT course book, philosophy of science. And
The phone's over 10 years old, I think.
Really good philosophy, sure.
I don't know where I'll plug it in.
The traditional disciplines within philosophy.
So if I looked up the TV and the phone that I'm recording on, it would be less than probably $100. I don't know. All of that, and it has a lens cap. Those are only $1 at the dollar store.
Well, not a key one. This could go on and on and on. As a matter of fact, once I
Man,
started
that's
writing
too loud
philosophy
again.
of this and philosophy of that, I mean, there's just about no subject, no discipline, no area of inquiry at all that you couldn't put in there in the blank. Philosophy of physics, philosophy of psychology, philosophy of social sciences, philosophy of social work. That's a course that's offered here in RIT. Something's supposed to differentiate these particular, like philosophy of physics. This isn't going to be a course in physics. What might it be about? And how can the same word? I'm asking you a philosophical question.
So let me adjust
How can
the.
this one word work in such various contexts? How can you have a philosophy of physics, philosophy of life? How can ethics be philosophical discipline? How can logic be a philosophical
The
discipline?
sound.
Yeah. Philosophy is thought. So if that
I
were
gotta
correct,
pull up all these
then
menus to do
these
that.
courses teach thought.
It's at about
these different
30%,
subjects,
so I'll put it at
whereas within the different
90% now.
subjects, they don't think about them at all. Now that can't be quite right. So maybe sharpen it up.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, maybe it's deeper, maybe it's not. But let me first of all hasten to add something that's important. Some people, and it's usually the people that teach in the philosophy department at the university, some people have PhDs in philosophy, right? But other people, like the folks that teach in the chemistry department, have their PhDs in chemistry. And there are people with PhDs in psychology and PhDs in engineering. All these different subjects, people can get PhDs. Now, what does PhD stand for? I don't know. It's a doctorate, but what does PhD stand for? What's the PH? D is doctor. It stands for...
Let me grab a keyboard.
Philosophy. So you've got more trouble here. Every single discipline, the most advanced degree you can get, although there's some degrees that don't have doctorates. I'm just about to say something incorrect. I was going to say every single
Alright, so
discipline
I got the keyboard here,
is the doctor of philosophy. That's not true in law.
and I had to adjust all the. Oh no, I pressed the wrong button.
In law, you get an LLD.
Oh no, it's just
How can all these different disciplines, I mean, what can the meaning of the word
Oh no, she's gonna
philosophy
fall
be
off.
extended to these cases.
There we go.
Any further suggestions? Wait a minute. Theory,
Did I press the right
theory is
button? I don't know.
in philosophy, as is the critique of theory. But theory is important in physics as well. So we're still trying to
Well, I'll
sharpen-
just
right in
say.
the right ballpark here, but we're trying to sharpen down what a philosophical person might be. There, and then back to here.
Let me up the volume. That's the loudest. Okay, so he had asked the audience a question. Hello, hello. Miss Baker, you called, I can't hear a thing. What did you say? Oh, you'll break up with me. So sorry, I cannot hear you, I'm kinda busy. Wow. So, alright, that's probably enough. So I have the keyboard. Let me restart the lecture.
Okay, so your suggestion is that in the particular sciences, say, like in chemistry, in the particular disciplines, their enterprise is based on fact, whereas in philosophy, in the discipline of philosophy, the opinions of the practitioners are based on opinion only, and not on fact. Not on fact. Opinion is opposed to fact. And maybe that picks up on what in the back of the room was referred to as theory. And maybe this word opinion is something like what you suggested. But that's not right either. And I've got something that I may repeat to you again, but I mean, you may be able to help me out on a particularly perplexing problem that I've got. You've all heard the expression, and I've repeated this in other countries and other languages, and apparently the same expression has duplicate images in many, many different cultures and many, many different languages. But the expression I'm thinking of is this. It says, well, that's very good.
Oh, I'm gonna change her name from
But it doesn't
Debbie
work at
to
all. You've heard that expression, right? Now maybe you can help me understand
RFK, JFK,
how it is that something can be
and Joe Jr.
I mean, it isn't really good.
Sister.
It doesn't work in practice, is it? I mean, what
What's her
theories
name
are
though?
for?
Is it
Well,
Rosalind?
by practice. So if it doesn't work in practice, then you'd scrap that theory and you go
I
back
think
to
it's
the drawing board and find
Rosalind.
out some other theories that
Rosalind
And
Kennedy.
opinions aren't particularly valuable if they can
Something like that.
But you may be onto something that is characteristic of philosophy in all of these different kinds. When you try to begin to point to
Oh, Rosemary
some
Kennedy.
between
So,
theory and fact, between opinion and fact.
alright.
You're not far from the mark, but what philosophers do and what people do.
So her
when
name's
they're doing
changing from
philosophy
Debbie to
isn't something that
Rosemary.
is supposed to be opposed to the facts or different from the facts. And before I make the further step, I did promise there's a couple of people who got some thoughts here. What was your thought?
Further discussion about the origin of these new questions.
I'm sorry. Say it more slowly. I can't. Part of what I have to do is to try to repeat what you say because I don't know that the mics are going to get the responses. So I got to get on
Further
it.
discussion about the use, the origin, and the purpose of the subject.
Okay, so it's a. All right.
Oh, it's
Philosophical
Rosemary.
discussion of physics, for example,
not
would be a discussion
Rosemary.
about the use, the origin, and the importance of the subject, for example. Is that what you're saying? Very interesting suggestion, and it's included. It's in there. But and did you have another? Okay. But let me just, instead of all this rhetoric and asking you to tell me what I'm supposed to be saying, and I've now figured it out thanks to you. But let me suggest to you that it's where facts are not so clear that things start getting philosophical. It's not that philosophers don't want facts. They'd love to have them. I mean, anytime, matter of fact, it seems to me the enterprise of philosophical thinking, whether it's done by a person called a philosopher or whether it's done by you in your day-to-day lives or whether it's done by physicists and chemists in their professions, wherever it's done, it seems to me, excuse me,
That event
the,
is about to
philosophical
end.
enterprise
Looks like the camera might be a little
is
bit too
undertaken
low.
Where questions are tricky, where questions aren't so clear, where facts are not readily available. Every philosopher wants his opinion, his theory, to be true to the facts. And indeed, a lot of philosophical effort, maybe more than 50% of it,
Oh, there's
the
0
majority of
cars in
philosophical
here.
undertaking is done not in the presentation of some positive theory, but in the criticism of somebody else's theory. And how does that criticism go? The criticism goes, that theory is not true to the facts, so it's not reasonable to hold. So a lot of philosophical effort isn't just like construction work. You're trying to build some grand theory of something. A lot of it's demolition work. Trying to show somebody else's theory or maybe my own previous theory really doesn't work as well as I thought or they thought it would. So let me define philosophy first and foremost. I will pick a new piece of paper because I think we've used that enough. Just for our purposes, and you'll find that people disagree about this. This is one of those philosophical questions where facts are hard to come by. But philosophy is the study, the examination of questions, issues, clear-cut solutions. It's a study of questions that don't presently lend themselves to clear-cut solutions. And I've underlined the word presently because the hope is precisely to give some clear-cut solution to the problem. Now, how does that, let's go back, there that is, and I'll put that thing back up there so you can look at it. But now that I've got that on the board,
There's a Sentinel.
look here again. Remember that there's 3 dots down at the end. This is a never-ending list. I think I can zoom
Oh no.
that. And I've just given you some examples of different issues that are treated in philosophy courses. But at the state of the art of every discipline, and I keep using physics as an example.
Well, she can't call the emergency
But at the very state of the art in physics, for example,
That happens.
often will be in disagreement on some particular issue. Sometimes it's a theoretical issue. For 30 years and more, the last 30 years of Einstein's life anyway, Einstein was in a huge dispute, theoretical dispute, with Niels Bohr about the nature of quantum mechanics, which is one of the most exciting and advanced areas of modern physics. But they were talking about exactly how one was supposed to interpret quantum mechanics. And they had huge differences on the subject, which I won't go into now. They thought of those differences, and they were right. They thought of those differences as philosophical.
So, alright, so
because the facts weren't there.
that's being antisocial, and let me see if anyone is even in. Oh, there's no one else in here now.
Gone to the experimental data, use the experimental data, and if there were no...
There's no one in the server. She could invite others. She could request workers for her company to work security. That might be another Sentinel. There's one. That's the same car. That's the Italian Mafia from GTA 3. They drove the Sentinels. And here's, oh, it's the XS though. If it's the XS, it's not worth as much as the regular, the classic. This one might not be an XS.
Does the name Adam Smith ring a bell? Who's Adam Smith? It just rings a bell. Does anyone know who Adam Smith is? In what field does Adam Smith?
I'm trying to figure out how
Economics is
to.
often thought of being the father of modern economic theory.
Doesn't the top of it
didn't really differentiate itself from philosophy until late. But when Adam Smith
retract? No, that looks like the hard top.
Of moral philosophy.
So let me see if this one is an XS.
And when Isaac Newton did his work,
That one's also an XS.
got everything. Physics, right? So when Isaac Newton did his
it
work,
is close
he's one of
enough.
the founders of modern physics in the 17th century. When he did his work, he was the chair.
It's not much of a
natural
difference.
philosophy at, I believe, Cambridge. Now, where they were chairs of this and that is not so important. What I'm trying to emphasize is
There's 2 more to
they
check.
made their groundbreaking contributions to their disciplines as
XS.
philosophers. What made those things groundbreaking contributions? Well, it's just this. Questions that before their time had been like this were, because of their work, made a little bit more clear-cut.
That was an XS.
As a good example.
That's okay.
Galileo is the person who, using geometric methods, came up with, later became the equations of motion that Newton used in his groundbreaking. But before Galileo figured out, for example, that the most effective way to understand motion was in terms of how much distance is covered per unit time. Before he figured out that would be a very, very useful way to look at motion. There were all kinds of other philosophical views of how one should regard motion. Aristotle, for example, a person we're going to read next week, who was a student of Plato's, Aristotle thought that motion was best understood as things moving toward their natural place. So that, for example, this pen, when I drop it, has made great progress toward its natural place. Now, it did get stopped here by the surface of the floor. But if I were to move that, well, the pen would be able to make further progress toward its natural place. And all motions should be understood in this way. Now, that was one theory. It was the dominant theory for 1,000 years and more. 1,500 years. But there were other philosophical theories of motion. When someone, Galileo in particular, came up with a way of portraying motion that then lent itself to a clearer presentation of what people were trying to get at in studying motion, then more and more people adopted that way of looking at things, and the study of motion became less and less, at least for those people, less and less a philosophical problem, more a clear-cut problem, which now could accept practitioners who would just study that thing. Learn all the right ways of doing it. They wouldn't have to debate on the ground floor every 20 seconds, which is exactly what's the right way of studying motion. They could all say Galileo's way is it and master it, right? And then that allows progress to be made. Once people have figured out what the right approach to a problem is, or what the clearest approach to the problem is, then they are in a good position to begin to make some more progress and debate the foundations of this. So philosophy, wherever you look at it, is the examination, the study of questions that don't lend themselves to clear answers. So whether you're at the state of the art in some very advanced discipline, like one of the sciences, or whether we're talking about the philosophy of life, how ought one to live one's life, the common feature in those two types of questions is that there's no real clear-cut answer. I mean, there's no rock you can turn over and find that the answer's under there. There's no experiment that you can do that can give you a decisive answer to the question. Or if you're asking ethical questions, what should a person do in a situation like that? Ethical questions are philosophical questions just because those questions don't lend themselves to clear-cut answers. You might like them to. You might like to have lists of rules. Just give me the list of rules, I'll follow them, and then I'll be ethically okay. But you know, lists of rules never work. Situations just are too complex for that. You always have to ask yourself, is this the right thing to do? This rule conflicts with that rule. How am I supposed to make a decision between these two damn rules? So any area where the answers aren't clear-cut, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's the best definition philosophically that you're ever going to come by. And one upshot of that is this, that people with PhDs in philosophy in particular aren't thereby really the experts in philosophy. It'll depend on the question. It'll depend on the area. Who the best people to ask would be for any philosophical question. Questions like the ones that Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein were debating for 30 years are probably best resolved by physicists, or people who at least have studied the relevant. And people who have questions about how they should live their lives are themselves probably in as good a position as anyone to uncover the answers to these questions. They don't need to turn to professional philosophers in the same way for ethical questions. Just because philosophers teach ethics courses doesn't mean that they're any better at resolving ethical questions in their lives than anyone else is. It's maybe they've studied ethical theories more. And they've studied perhaps how complicated it can be to bring ethical theories into practice. Those are the sorts of things that a professional in ethics might have a handle on. And I'd have to say, although I'm no longer in a position to make the strongest case for this, since I'm an atheist, but I'd have to say that in areas of philosophy of religion, people who are professionals in religion, whether they're philosophers of religion or theologians, this is my view on a tricky philosophical question, but it seems to me that they're not necessarily the best people to turn to either. These seem to me to be the same sorts of questions as these other ones are. There is no way to find a clear-cut solution to the problem. So one has to rely on what sources one can find to decide what happens. All right, any questions about that? Because so far all I wanted to do is define philosophy. And one important consequence, that I haven't written down, I'm not going to write down, but I want you to remember this. One important consequence is that who the experts are on philosophical questions, that's something that's going to vary from question to question. And in lots of areas, the answer might be, there's no experts on the question. The best example I can think of is, how should one live one's life? I mean, who is the expert on that? What is the right relationship between the individual and society? How much should one's own, these are all philosophical questions, how much should one's own desires, interests, predilections define one's life? To what extent, on the other hand, should one take into consideration the needs and desires and interests of others? And then which others? I mean, how broad a base of others do we have to take into consideration figuring out how to define our lives? These are all philosophical questions, and I'd say that they're pretty close to the how should one live one's life kind of question. I don't know who's going to be an expert on this. There's lots of people who have great ideas on the subject, lots of different opinions, but I don't see anybody that I would pinpoint as being an expert. So,
Wow.
in areas of physics, there are tricky questions, and there's some people whose answers I would respect, and other people's answers I wouldn't have so much respect for because they haven't really studied the subject. So there may be experts in some philosophical areas, and there may not be experts in some others. And where those experts are will vary from question to question. So that's issue number one. And what that also suggests is, and I will do this up here too now, that if I had to, this isn't an exhaustive list either. I'm just going to put an arrow to the left or to the right of this graphic to indicate that I don't mean list to list. There's everything in the area. I'll just use a few examples. These are three disciplines that are sometimes thought to be quite distinct. I mean, maybe especially religion and science. These are supposed to be very, very distinct disciplines. But I suggest to you that all three of these things, and I put these arrows on the right and the left indicate that there might be lots of other things that you can put on this list, but all three of these things are originally motivated in human affairs by attempts to grapple with tough questions. Sometimes, I put them in this arrangement. This is supposed to indicate no particular order in philosophy, religion, science. Sometimes you get people saying, well, religion comes first. That's really the old way of trying to solve tricky human problems about what's the nature of the world, what's the nature of the human condition. People will say, all right, religion came first, then along comes philosophy, thousands of years later, and then in the modern world we've got science. I don't think that makes any sense, really. You'll see some people portraying the situation in that kind of chronological order. I don't think that's correct. I think all three of these areas, and as I say, there may be many others, all three of these areas, all of them are perennial attempts that go back, all three of them, as far as you have written evidence, and I think will continue on into the indefinite future. All three of them